She spun just as the mountain lion's amber eyes caught the moonlight, its muscles coiled to spring. The Apache's knife flew past her ear, embedding itself between the cat's shoulder blades with a wet thud. The predator dropped, twitching once, before going still. "You saved my life," Cordelia breathed, lowering her rifle with trembling hands. She'd never seen a man move so fast, so fluid, like water finding its course. "You would have done the same." He stepped closer, retrieving his blade with practiced efficiency. In the pale light, she could see the sharp angles of his face, the way his dark hair fell loose around his shoulders. "I am Kalen of the Chiricahua, Cordelia Whitmore." She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of how she must look, her traveling dress torn, face streaked with dust from 3 days on the trail. I was trying to reach my uncle's homestead when my horse threw a shoe. Dangerous to travel alone." His eyes held hers, and she felt something electric pass between them, something that had nothing to do with the danger they just faced. "I had no choice. My father died, left debts. The creditors took everything." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. There was something about this man that made her want to confess her secrets. Kalen nodded slowly. "Your uncle. He expects you?" I hope so. I sent word, but—" She shrugged, trying to appear braver than she felt. The truth was, she hadn't heard from Uncle Mortimer in 5 years. For all she knew, he was dead too. The Whitmore place. 2 miles north, by the creek. Kellen's statement surprised her. "Your uncle trades with my people. Fair man." Relief flooded through her. "He's alive then?" Was last moon. Kalen gathered the reins of his paint horse, a magnificent creature that had appeared from nowhere. "I will take you there. You don't have to. Mountain lions hunt in pairs." His eyes swept the tree line. "The mate will smell blood soon." As if summoned by his words, a distant scream echoed through the canyon, raising the hair on Cordelia's arms. Without another word, Kalen swung onto his horse and extended his hand down to her. The moment their fingers touched, Cordelia felt a jolt that had nothing to do with fear. His hand was warm, calloused from years of survival, yet gentle as he pulled her up behind him. She settled against his back, feeling the solid strength of him, breathing in the scent of sage and leather. "Hold tight," he murmured, and she wrapped her arms around his waist. Her cheek pressed to his shoulder. They rode through the night in comfortable silence, the horses' hooves finding purchase on the rocky trail. Cordelia had never been so close to a man, had barely spoken to one outside her father and the preacher. But with Kalen, words seemed unnecessary. His body moved with the horse's rhythm, and she found herself swaying with them both, feeling safer than she had in months. When the first hint of dawn touched the eastern mountains, she could see smoke rising from a chimney ahead Uncle Mortimer's place, just as Kalen had promised. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I don't know what would have happened if you would have survived." His voice was certain. "I see it in you. Fire." Uncle Mortimer's weathered face cracked into a grin when he saw Cordelia slide down from the Apache's horse, though his eyes remained wary as they fixed on Kalen. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," the old man drawled, shouldering his rifle. "Little Corey, all grown up, and keeping mighty interesting company. He saved my life, Uncle." Cordelia stepped protectively closer to Kalen, surprising herself with the gesture. "A mountain lion. I know this man," Mortimer interrupted, his tone warming slightly. "Traded with him plenty. Fair dealer, even of some folks round here. Got fool notions about his kind." Kalen dismounted gracefully, his dark eyes scanning the homestead with a warrior's practiced assessment. "She needs shelter, food. Her horse is lame. Course she does. Come on in, both of you. Got coffee on and venison from yesterday's hunt." Mortimer turned toward the log cabin, then paused. Kalen, your people still camped up by Devil's Canyon? 4. Now. Something in Kellen's voice made Cordelia glance at him sharply. A shadow had crossed his features, there and gone like clouds over the sun. Inside the one-room cabin, Cordelia felt overwhelmed by the masculine disorder animal pelts hanging. From the rafters, rifles mounted on wooden pegs, the smell of tobacco and leather everywhere. But it was warm, and the coffee Mortimer poured was strong enough to wake the dead. So, her uncle said, settling into a carved wooden chair, what brings my brother's girl all the way out to God's forgotten country? Cordelia wrapped her hands around the tin mug, drawing courage from its warmth. Father died 6 months ago. Consumption. The debts ... She swallowed hard. I lost everything. Even found your old letters mentioning you might could use help with the trading post. Mortimer's eyes softened. Jonathan always was too trusting with his money. Should have written sooner about his passing. I did write. 3 letters. Mail. Don't always make it this far out. Apache troubles mostly. He shot a glance at Kalen, who sat silently near the door, though Cordelia noticed his hand never strayed far from his knife. No offense meant, none taken. Kellen's voice was steady, but Cordelia caught the tightness around his eyes. Your mail rider was found dead 2 weeks past. Arrows in his back. Apache arrows? Mortimer leaned forward. Comanche, made to look like our work. Kellen's jaw tightened. Your cavalry does not ask questions before they shoot. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Cordelia found herself studying Kellen's profile, the proud set of his shoulders, the way he held himself ready even in rest. How different he was from the pale, soft men she'd known back east, with their pressed suits and smooth hands. You planning trouble? Mortimer asked directly. I plan to protect my people. Kalen met the older man's gaze steadily. We signed papers with your government. Promised land, promised peace. But promises are like snow, they melt when the sun grows hot. The new territorial governor has been making noises about moving. All the tribes further west, Mortimer admitted. Talk of bringing in more settlers, opening up the mining claims. Cordelia watched Kellen's hands clench into fists, then deliberately relax. The control he exercised over himself was remarkable. Then she wondered what fires burned beneath that calm exterior. How long do we have? Kalen asked. Hard to say. Could be months, could be weeks. Mortimer rubbed his grizzled chin. Depends on how much gold they find up in the foothills. Gold. Always gold. Cordelia had seen what the hunger for it did to men back in St. Louis turn neighbors into enemies, fathers against sons. Out here, it would be even worse. Uncle, she said quietly, if Kellen's people are forced to leave, then I lose the best trading partners I ever had, Mortimer finished. Apache know this land better than any white man ever will. Know where to find the good furs, the healing plants, which passes stay clear in winter. Without them ... He shrugged. You would be welcome to come with us. Kalen said suddenly, his eyes on Cordelia. My people have no quarrel with those who treat us fairly. The offer hung in the air like smoke. Cordelia felt her heart skip at the thought riding into the unknown with this enigmatic man, leaving behind everything familiar. It was terrifying. It was also more appealing than she cared to admit. Now hold on there, Mortimer growled. Girl just got here. Let her catch her breath before you start filling her head with wild notions. But Cordelia was already imagining it, the freedom of the trail, the vast sky overhead, Kellen's strong presence beside her. She'd come west looking for safety, for a place to belong. She hadn't expected to find something that felt like destiny. Sound of hoofbeats thundering up the canyon broke the morning stillness like a gunshot. Kalen was on his feet and at the window in one fluid motion, his hand on his knife hilt. Riders, he said grimly. Many of them. Mortimer grabbed his rifle and peered through the gap in the shutters. Cavalry? Damn. He shot a look at Kalen. Back room, now. I will not hide like a rabbit in its hole. You'll hide or you'll hang, Mortimer snapped. That's Lieutenant Crenshaw out there, and he's got a hard-on for Apache blood. Been itching for an excuse since he got assigned to this godforsaken territory. Cordelia felt ice form in her stomach as she watched Kalen weigh his options. The proud set of his shoulders told her everything about how he felt about hiding, but the practical gleam in his dark eyes suggested he understood the wisdom of it. Go, she urged, surprising herself by reaching out to touch his arm. The contact sent warmth shooting up her fingers. Please. Their eyes met and held for a heartbeat before he nodded curtly and slipped into the back room just as heavy boots stomped onto the porch. Whitmore, a harsh voice bellowed. Open up, official army business. Mortimer cracked the door, keeping his rifle visible. Morning, Lieutenant. Little early for a social call, ain't it? Cut the pleasantries, old man. We're tracking a war party that hit the Silverton mine yesterday. Killed 3 men and made off with their gold. Trail leads this way. Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She positioned herself where she could see both the front door and the back room, ready to create a distraction if needed. Well, I ain't seen hide nor hair of any war party, Mortimer said calmly. Been here all night with my niece. She just arrived from back east. Lieutenant. Crenshaw pushed his way inside without invitation, his pale blue eyes scanning the cabin like a hawk hunting prey. He was younger than Cordelia had expected, maybe 30, with a kind of clean-shaven, sharp-featured face that spoke of Eastern breeding and Western ambition. Miss, he nodded curtly in her direction, then returned his attention to Mortimer. Apache been trading here recent? You know they have? It's legal, last I checked. Legal don't mean smart. Crenshaw's tone was contemptuous. Times are changing, Whitmore. Governor wants this territory pacified, and that means no more coddling. Savages. Apache I trade with ain't savages, Mortimer replied evenly. They're decent folk trying to make a living, same as anyone. Decent folk don't scalp miners and steal gold. Cordelia found her voice. Perhaps it wasn't Apache at all. My companion mentioned that other tribes sometimes use Apache arrows to deflect blame. Crenshaw's attention snapped to her like a compass finding north. Your companion? Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized her mistake. I meant the man who helped me reach my uncle's homestead. He mentioned ... What man? Crenshaw's voice had gone dangerously quiet. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Cordelia could feel Mortimer's tension, could sense Kalen listening from the back room. One wrong word and blood would flow. Traveling preacher, she said. Finally, Brother Matthias. He was heading south to establish a mission. Funny thing about preachers, Crenshaw mused, stepping closer to her. They generally travel with Bibles and crosses, not war paint and scalping knives. I wouldn't know about that, Lieutenant. His eyes raked over her, taking in her torn dress, her sun-darkened skin, the way she held herself. You look like you've had quite an adventure getting here, Miss Whitmore. Cordelia Whitmore. Well, Miss Whitmore, I hope you'll be more careful about the company you keep. This territory's no place for a lady to be consorting with the wrong sort. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Cordelia lifted her chin defiantly. I'll keep that in mind, Lieutenant. Crenshaw smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. See, that you do. He turned back to Mortimer. We'll be camped down by the creek for a few days, following the trail. I trust you'll let us know if any Apache happen to wander by for a friendly visit. Course I will. After the soldiers left, Cordelia sagged against the wall, her knees suddenly weak. Kalen emerged from the back room, his face carved from granite. They will not give up easily, he said. No, they won't. Mortimer set his rifle aside with shaking hands. Crenshaw's been looking for an excuse to start a shooting war. 3 dead miners is all the justification he needs. But what if your people didn't do it? Cordelia asked. Kellen's laugh was bitter. Truth matters little when there is gold to be claimed and land to be taken. We are convenient enemies. So what do? We? Kellen's eyes found hers across the room, and she saw something flicker there, surprise, perhaps even hope. Yes. We. The words came out stronger than she'd intended. I may not know much about this country, but I know right from wrong. And I know that hiding the truth never solved anything. Mortimer looked between them, understanding dawning in his weathered features. Girl, you don't know what you're saying. Getting between the army and the Apache is a good way to wind up dead. Maybe. Cordelia straightened her shoulders. But it's also a good way to live with yourself. The moon hung like a silver coin in the star-drunk sky when Kalen returned to the homestead. He'd left before dawn to scout the soldiers' camp, and Cordelia had spent the day in an agony of worry, starting at every sound, watching the canyon mouth until her eyes burned. They're moving out at first light, he reported quietly, slipping through the back door like a shadow given form. Following a false trail toward Copper Creek. False trail? Mortimer looked up from cleaning his rifle. My cousin Nakoa is gifted at misdirection. Kellen's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. By the time they realized they're following day-old deer tracks, we'll have time to find the real killers. Cordelia set down her mending, her heart racing at the casual way he'd said, "We kids, you have a plan." The beginning of one. Kalen moved to the window, his warrior's instincts never allowing him to fully relax. The miners were killed with war arrows, but not Apache arrows. The fletching was wrong, the points too crude. Whoever did this wanted them found. Comanche? Mortimer guessed. Or white men who know enough to make it look like Comanche work. Kellen's eyes found Cordelia's in the lamplight. There are men in Silverton who would profit greatly if all the tribes were driven from this territory. Mining consortium, Mortimer. Spat. Bastard's been sniffing around here for months, asking about mineral rights, offering to buy out homesteaders for pennies on the dollar. Cordelia felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. If the Apache are forced to relocate, their treaty lands would revert to the territorial government. Who then sells them to ... The highest bidder. Kellen's voice was grim. Men like Jackson Hartwell grow rich while my people starve on reservation land that won't support a prairie dog, let alone families. Hartwell is the mining consortium boss. Mortimer explained to Cordelia. Slick as snake oil and twice as poisonous. Word is he's got the territorial governor's ear and his hand in the man's pocket. So how do we prove it? Cordelia asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the canyon filled with their wild song. We go to Silverton, Kalen said finally. Tonight. Before Crenshaw returns with more soldiers and bloodier intentions. That's a fool's errand, and you know it, Mortimer protested. Town's no place for an Apache, especially now. They'll string you up soon as look at you. Not if I'm not alone. Cordelia's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. You want me to go with you? A white woman and her Apache guide traveling to Silverton on business. Kellen's dark eyes held hers. No one questions such things. It is expected. Girls. Got no experience with this kind of deception, Mortimer warned. This ain't some parlor game. Get caught in a lie out there and you'll both wind up dead. Then we won't get caught. Cordelia stood, decision crystallizing in her chest like forming ice. She thought of the proud way Kalen held himself, the gentleness in his hands despite their calloused strength, the way he'd risked his life to save hers without question. When do we leave? Kaylin studied her face in the flickering lamplight, as if trying to read the truth of her resolve there. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. 1 hour. Dressed like a lady of means, someone important enough that men will want to impress her with their secrets. As Cordelia retreated to the back room to change into her one good dress, the blue silk she'd saved from the creditors, she heard Mortimer and Kaylin talking in low, urgent voices. By the time she emerged, her hair pinned up in an elaborate Eastern style, they'd worked out the details. "You're Mrs. Catherine Fairfax from Denver," Mortimer explained, handing her a leather portfolio. "Rich widow looking to invest in mining ventures. Got papers here to back up the story in case anyone asks to see them." "And you?" she asked Kaylin. "Joseph Crowfeather, half-breed scout and translator, hired to help you negotiate with local tribes for land rights." His mouth twisted with bitter irony. Men like Hartwell think all Indians are the same useful tools to be discarded when no longer needed. Cordelia tucked the papers into her reticule, her hands steady despite the fear fluttering in her stomach. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Evidence that Hartwell or his men were behind the murders. Witness testimony. Proof that the attack was staged." Kaylin checked his weapons, sliding them into concealed positions beneath his coat. "Anything that will cast doubt on Apache guilt." "And if we can't find proof?" Kaylin and Mortimer exchanged a look heavy with unspoken understanding. "Then my people will fight," Kaylin said quietly, "and many will die on both sides." The weight of that truth settled on Cordelia's shoulders like a mantle. She thought of the families that would be torn apart, the children who would grow up without fathers, the mothers who would mourn sons lost to a war built on lies and greed. "Then we'd better find proof," she said. Silverton crouched in the valley, like a hungry animal, all raw lumber and desperate hope. Even at midnight, the saloons blazed with light and the stamp mills thundered, crushing ore in an endless rhythm that sounded like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Cordelia pulled her shawl tighter as they rode down the muddy Main Street, acutely aware of the eyes following them. A well-dressed woman and an Indian, even in the half-light, drew attention like blood drew flies. "The Silver Dollar," Kaylin murmured, nodding toward the largest of the saloons. "Hartwell holds court there most nights, buying drinks and buying men." They dismounted at the livery stable, where Cordelia played her part to perfection, speaking in the crisp Eastern accent she'd learned from her finishing school days, treating Kaylin with the casual dismissiveness expected of a wealthy white woman toward her hired guide. Dot had cut at her to do it, to see the way his face went carefully blank, but she understood the necessity. Their lives depended on the performance. "I require rooms at the hotel," she told the stable boy, pressing a silver dollar into his grimy palm. "For myself and my man here. Separate accommodations, naturally. Yes'm. Hotel's just across the way. Mrs. Kowalski runs a clean place." The hotel was anything but clean, but it was busy, which served their purposes. Cordelia registered as Catherine Fairfax, wealthy widow, while Kaylin stood silently behind her, playing the role of faithful servant. "I'll need my man to have access to the lobby," she told Mrs. Kowalski, a stern Polish woman with suspicious eyes. "He carries messages and handles my business correspondence." "Indian?" Mrs. Kowalski's disapproval was plain. "Half-breed," Cordelia corrected coolly. "Harvard educated. Quite useful for my purposes." The lies came easier than she'd expected, rolling off her tongue like honey. An hour later, she sat in the Silver Dollar's back room, nursing a glass of wine she couldn't afford to drink and listening to Jackson Hartwell hold forth about the bright future of mining in the territory. He was a large man with soft hands and shrewd eyes, the kind who'd never swung a pickaxe but knew the exact value of every ounce of ore pulled from the ground. "The problem, Mrs. Fairfax," he was saying, is the Indian situation. Can't have proper development with savages running wild, attacking honest workingmen. Terrible business about those miners, Cordelia murmured, playing the concerned investor. I heard it was quite brutal. Scalped and mutilated, confirmed a thin man with nervous eyes. Peterson, one of Hartwell's lieutenants. Apache work. No question. How can you be certain? Cordelia asked innocently. Arrows, tracking signs. My man Gideon knows Indian ways better than most. Hartwell gestured to a scarred brute of a man sitting in the corner, methodically cleaning his fingernails with a bowie knife. Cordelia's blood chilled as she looked at Gideon. There was something cold and calculating in his pale eyes, something that spoke of violence done for profit rather than passion. This was a man who would kill for money and sleep soundly after. Still, she said carefully, I'd hate to invest in operations that might face ongoing tribal resistance. Perhaps if there were some way to negotiate peaceful relocations. No. Negotiating with savages. Gideon spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel in a tin cup. Only language they understand is lead and steel. Gideon's right, Hartwell agreed. Which is why what happened to those poor boys might be a blessing. In disguise. Governor's finally going to take action, clear out the Apache once and for all. You seem quite confident about that, Cordelia observed. I have it on good authority. Lieutenant Crenshaw is a man who understands the necessity of strong action, unlike some of his predecessors who were too soft on the Indian problem. Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountains, and the first drops of rain began pattering against the saloon's grimy windows. Cordelia excused herself to powder her nose, slipping out the back door where Kalen waited in the shadows. Hartwell's man Gideon, she whispered urgently. He's the one, I'm sure of it. Evidence? Nothing concrete, but... She shivered as another rumble of thunder echoed off the canyon walls. He knows too much about Indian ways. And there's something... In his eyes... Killer's eyes. Kellen's voice was grim. I have seen them before. But knowing and proving are different things. Then we need to make him prove it himself. An idea was forming in Cordelia's mind, dangerous but potentially effective. What if Mrs. Fairfax wanted to hire someone with his particular skills? Someone who could handle problems. Quietly, Kalen stared at her through the darkness. I would risk everything to keep your people safe. The words came out before she could stop them, raw with emotion she hadn't meant. To reveal, something shifted in Kellen's expression, a crack in his carefully maintained composure. Cordelia. The way he said her name, soft and wondering, made her heart skip like a stone on water. Rain began to fall in earnest now, drumming on the saloon's tin roof, creating a curtain of sound around them. We should go back inside, she whispered, though neither of them moved. Yes, he agreed, but instead of turning away, he stepped closer, close enough that she could see raindrops caught in his dark hair like stars. But first, What? His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. I need to tell you something. Before we go back in there and risk everything on this gamble of yours. What is it? You asked me once what it was like to be Apache in a white man's world. His eyes searched hers. But I want to know what it is like to be you. What it is like to be brave enough to stand between armies for the sake of strangers. They're not strangers, she whispered. Not anymore. The rain had turned to a steady downpour by the time Cordelia re-entered the Silver Dollar, her dress damp despite Kellen's attempts to shield her with his coat. She'd left him in the alley with specific instructions and a prayer that her plan wouldn't get them both killed, Mrs. Fairfax. Hartwell rose as she returned to their table, ever the gentleman when money was involved. Thought you might have drowned out there. Nearly did. She settled into her chair, accepting the towel Peterson offered. Terrible weather for travel. Gets worse this time of year, Gideon remarked, not looking up from his knife. Course, bad. Weather can be useful sometimes. Covers tracks, muffles sounds. Cordelia's pulse quickened. I imagine a man in your line of work would know about such things. What line is that, ma'am? Problem solving. She met his pale eyes directly. Mr. Hartwell mentioned you have experience with difficult situations. Interest flickered across Gideon's scarred features. Hartwell leaned forward, wine loosening his tongue. Gideon here used to scout for the Army. Knows every trail between here and Mexico, every hiding spot the Apache favor. Impressive. Cordelia sipped her wine, playing the part of a woman feeling out a delicate business proposition. I may have need of such expertise myself. My late husband left certain ... complications. Back in Denver. Men who feel they're owed money that doesn't exist. It was a carefully crafted lie designed to appeal to Gideon's mercenary nature. Cordelia watched his eyes sharpen with predatory interest. What kind of complications? He asked. The kind that require permanent solutions. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. I'm prepared to pay handsomely for discretion and results. Gideon exchanged glances with Hartwell, who nodded slightly. Might be we can work something out. What exactly did you have in mind? Before Cordelia could answer, a commotion erupted near the saloon's front entrance. Shouts, the sound of overturning chairs, then Kellen's voice raised in apparent alarm. Fire! Fire in the hotel! Pandemonium exploded through the silver dollar as patrons stampeded toward the doors. In the chaos, Cordelia found herself pressed against Gideon, his hand gripping her arm with unnecessary force. Easy there, Mrs. Fairfax, he said, his breath reeking of whiskey. No need to panic. Probably just some drunk knocked over a lamp. But his eyes were calculating, and Cordelia realized with a chill that he suspected something. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Funny thing about fires, Gideon continued, raising his voice to be heard over the commotion. They got a way of destroying evidence. Papers, witnesses, inconvenient truths, ... I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. His smile was like a knife blade. Rich widow from Denver, traveling with a half-breed guide, asking pointed questions about Indian troubles. You ain't who you claim to be, are you? Terror flooded through Cordelia, but she forced herself to remain calm. I'm exactly who I claim to be. And if you don't release me this instant, you'll what? Scream for help? Gideon's laugh was ugly. Lady, in about 2 minutes this place is going to be empty except for me, you, and whatever game you're really playing. He was right. The crowd was thinning as people rushed outside to gawk at the supposed fire. Even Hartwell and Peterson had abandoned their table, leaving Cordelia alone with the most dangerous man in Silverton. Now then, Gideon said, forcing her back toward the rear of the saloon, why don't you tell me who you really are and what you want? Start with how you knew to ask. About those dead miners. I told you, I'm an investor. Bullshit. The blade of his knife appeared at her throat, cold steel against warm skin. Investors don't ask the kind of questions you've been asking. But you know what kind of people do? What kind? She whispered. The kind that end up dead in dark alleys. The knife pressed harder, and Cordelia felt a warm trickle run down her neck. So I'll ask one more time, who are you working for? No one, she gasped. I swear, wrong answer. The knife drew back, and Cordelia closed her eyes, waiting for the killing blow. Instead, she heard a wet thud, followed by Gideon's surprised grunt. Her eyes snapped open to see a throwing knife buried in his shoulder, his own weapon clattering to the floor. Kalen materialized from the shadows like an avenging spirit, his face a mask of controlled fury. Step away from her, Gideon stumbled. Backward, clutching his wounded shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. You Indian bastard, I am Apache, Kalen said quietly, advancing with deadly grace. We do not suffer those who threaten women. This ain't over, Gideon snarled, backing toward the rear exit. Hartwell's got the governor's ear, the army in his pocket. Your people are finished, savage. Perhaps, but you will not live to see it. Something in Kellen's voice made Gideon's bravado crumble. The killer turned and fled into the storm, leaving a trail of blood and threats. Cordelia sagged against the wall, her knees suddenly weak. The fire, smoke pot in the alley, old Apache trick. Kalen was beside her instantly, his hands gentle as they examined the shallow cut on her neck. Are you hurt? Just scared. She caught his hands in hers, feeling the tremor in his fingers despite his outward calm. You saved me. Again. I nearly lost you. His voice was rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. When I saw that blade at your throat, their eyes met in the dim light of the abandoned saloon, and Cordelia saw her own desperate relief reflected there. Without thinking, she rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and quick. A whispered thank you against his lips. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise. I've never, she began, then stopped, heat flooding her cheeks. Never been kissed, he finished softly. Understanding dawning in his dark eyes, she nodded. Suddenly shy, Kellen's hands came up to frame her face, thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. Then we'll start slow, he whispered, and kissed her properly gentle and sweet and full of promise. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when they finally returned to Mortimer's homestead, tired but triumphant. Gideon's blood-stained confession coerced from him at knife point in the alley behind the saloon was safely tucked in Cordelia's reticule, along with a signed statement from a witness who'd seen Gideon planting Apache arrows at the murder. Seen? Well? Mortimer demanded as they dismounted. Did you get what you needed? More than.